Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this MEI Network Seminar series, the third in this series on wholesale markets. So my name's David Keith. I'm an Associate Professor of Strategy at Melbourne Business School, an Associate Director of the MBS Centre for Sustainability and Business. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people, who have been custodians of this land for thousands of years. And we acknowledge and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. For those of you joining us online today, we invite you to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you're listening in from. Not getting any click. Try with the keyboard. Sorry, slight. I'll do that. There we go. That's better. So, as I mentioned, this is the third in a series of seminars we're having this year. Today on the topic, all on the topics of the electricity supply chain, today focusing on wholesale markets. We're streaming this seminar online. So for those of you joining remotely, we'd love you to participate through the Q&A. We've got the chat function disabled, but please contribute any questions you have, and we'll certainly try and get those incorporated into the discussion with our guest speaker, Paul Austin. So, to get things started off, let me introduce Mr. Paul Austin, who's Group Manager of Reform Delivery at the Australian Energy Market Operator. Paul is responsible for working on major market reforms such as the capacity mechanism and the transmission access reform. Prior to this role, he was responsible for market monitoring at AEMO and for establishing the quarterly energy dynamics report. Before joining AEMO, Paul held various senior positions at AGL and Energy Australia, covering topics such as portfolio optimization, forecasting and pricing, and risk management. Paul has a mathematics training. He held a master's in operations research from the London School of Economics and an MBA from our own Melbourne Business School. So without further delay, Paul, please share your expertise with us.
Thank you, David, and good to be here. So today we're going to be talking about two aspects of the market. So one is how the market works, the mechanics of the market, the national electricity market. And secondly, I'll be reviewing some of the key trends that we've seen in this market over the years. So an electricity market is a entity that's constructed from various things, and the building blocks on the left show you what you need to have to make an electricity market. So you need participants, obviously. You need a mechanism for the participants to bid into the market and for their bids to be selected and dispatched. You need information, and lots of information to help the participants formulate their bids, but also to work out the amount of demands that you are trying to match with supply. Outcomes from the market include what various generators and customers and loads actually did. So you need metering, and you need a mechanism to settle the market and ensure its financial integrity. Also required is, from time to time, AEMO needs to intervene in the market to make sure that it works and it maintains reliability and security. And finally, there's a set of rules which govern all of the market outcomes and mechanisms, and they have now reached 1,900 pages. I checked that this morning, so if you're ever looking for a good read, that's a good place to start. So I'll be focusing on those darker purple boxes in this presentation, and outcome from the wholesale electricity market is primarily focused on a spot price. And the spot price itself is what creates a secondary wholesale market and contract prices. And the contract prices are then what drives outcomes for customers in terms of retail prices. So the whole thing sort of hangs together, and it's very important to remember the role of the contract market is supplementary to the electricity spot market, and the two things have evolved since day one of the NEM and are required to deliver the outcomes. So we'll start off with a few sort of slides on dispatch, and sort of we'll start slowly and build up to something more complicated. So this represents a simple example where we have a load of 4,000 megawatt hours, and that can be served by some renewables generation, and they're bidding at $0 a megawatt hour, which is sort of reflective of their short run marginal cost. And then we've got some brown coal bidding at $20 a megawatt hour and some gas bidding at $50 a megawatt hour. So this can be translated into a simple supply curve. And then when we intersect demand and supply, we get the dispatch solutions, which are that renewables is fully dispatched, brown coal partially dispatched, and gas not dispatched. And we also get the price outcome, which is brown coal setting the price at $20 a megawatt hour. So that's an unconstrained example. We now make it a little bit more complicated, and we put on a transmission constraint. So this now limits the amount of renewables that can get to serve the load to 1,000 megawatt hours. So we have the same supply curve of the different generator types, but in this case, we can't actually solve the supply and demand situation with a simple line. It becomes a more complicated dispatch, and the dispatch outcome is that we only dispatch 1,000 megawatt hours of renewables, so that's constrained by the transmission line. And then we dispatch all of the brown coal, and we need to dispatch some of the gas. And because gas is now the marginal source of supply, that sets the price at $50 a megawatt hour. So what this illustrates is that as soon as you start bringing constraints into the dispatch, then it becomes a lot more complicated and no longer a simple bid stack, and we require a dispatch engine to solve this. And in the NEM, we have NEMD, the NEM dispatch engine, and that's a linear program which is used to solve the market every 5 minutes. So let's make it even more complicated, and we'll add in a second region. So the NEM has 5 regions, and they all have at least one interconnector between them. And in this example now, we've added on a load of 1,000 megawatt hours in the second region, and some hydro generation bidding at $60 a megawatt hour. So if there's no interconnector limits, this reverts to a simple merit order dispatch solution, and we dispatch in order of price. So all of the renewables gets dispatched, all of the brown coal, and some of the gas. And that's then basically is used to deliver and serve the load across both regions. And so that sets the price at $50 a megawatt hour. Now, if we put a limit on the interconnector, then things become more interesting. So if the interconnector is limited to $400 a megawatt hour, what happens is that the region 1 generation, which is the cheaper generation, is dispatched to its full extent. That can be dispatched and still meet that interconnector limit. So we effectively dispatch 4,400 megawatt hours from region 1, and we have 400 megawatt hours of region 1 generation flowing down to region 2. But we still need another 600 megawatt hours from region 2. And so what happens is we get a dispatch solution where the price in region 1 is $20, set by the brown coal in region 1. And then in region 2, we get a price of $60 set by the hydro generation. So those are some simple sort of dispatch slides to show you how bidding and pricing and interconnectors work. And that's sort of very much focused on energy, but in order to run a power system, we have to worry about frequency, and managing a power system in real time is all about keeping and restoring frequency within certain limits. So we have a normal operating band, but we also need to worry about what happens if there is a trip of a single load or a generator, and that can cause frequency to suddenly deviate outside of that normal operating frequency band. And so we have 2 types of services. One is called regulation services, and the other is called contingency services. And regulation services are used to manage that balancing of energy within a dispatch interval, and a dispatch interval is 5 minutes. So you sort of set your forecast, and then things will be different to your forecast for various reasons. and frequency will go up and down. And so regulation FCAS is required to balance that during the 5 minutes. Now, you can also get these contingency style events. And so you need to be able to have a range of services ready to deal with a contingency. And we have 4 time periods that we manage frequency over. 1 second market, which is a new market in the last couple of years, 6 seconds, 60 seconds, and 5 minutes. And we require both raise and lower services in order to deal with these various situations. Worth noting that FCAS markets are for enablement only. So if you get dispatched for regulation FCAS, you get paid for a enablement fee for the amount that you are dispatched. But then during that 5 minutes, you might actually be required to provide the regulation service. And that means generating, if you're a generator, or reducing your generation, or if you're a load, like a battery, increasing your charging or reducing your charging. And the actual change in energy is paid at the energy price. So you get paid a combination of your FCAS price for enablement and your energy price for the actual service that you supply. So bidding in the NEM is done at a dispatch unit identifier level, a DUID, and each generating unit, dispatchable units, can offer up to 10 price and quantity bands for each energy and FCAS service. So in this example, we've got a generator with 10 bands, and they're bidding between minus $1,000 a megawatt hour, which is the market floor price. That's the minimum you can bid down to. And the highest bid is the market price cap, which is now set at $17,500 since 1st of July. So they have a range of price outcomes, and then they distribute their megawatts across that range of price bands. They also need to supply various physical attributes of their plant, such as the ramp rates that the plant can change by, its maximum available capacity, and for FCAS services where it's bidding energy and FCAS, it has to show the FCAS trapezium, as we call it, which is the range of feasible energy and FCAS outcomes. And that reflects a minimum enablement and a maximum enablement quantity. So obviously, if you're limited to 100 megawatts in terms of your generation and you want to offer 10 megawatts of raised FCAS, that sort of sets the maximum enablement quantity that you can be dispatched for FCAS and energy. Now, participants must lock in their 10 price bands by noon each day, and then they can reallocate volume between those price bands at any time, but they must give a rebid reason. NEMD solves the market every 5 minutes, and it co-optimizes between energy and FCAS. So NEMD has an objective function, and its aim is to minimize the overall cost of all of the resources that it's dispatching, and the cost is reflected by the combination of their bids and their quantities that they have put into the bidding system. So when NEMD finds a solution, which is usually pretty quick, in a few seconds, it then has to, that solution, the dispatch outcomes are provided to participants, and normally that's by AGC, Automatic Generator Control. Now, with the introduction of IESS, and that's the Integrating Energy Storage Systems rule change, which came in June, we now have an extra thing to bid into, which is shown in red on the slide, and that's the direction of your energy. So if you're a generator, you have to put in a direction of generator, and if you're a load, and if you're a battery, you can effectively put 10 load bids and 10 generator bids if you're a scheduled bidirectional unit. So we have NEMD and we have the market, and that deals with situations most of the time. But from time to time, AEMO will need to intervene for various reasons. So there's routine intervention, which is imposing constraints and implementing constraints. And part of that is just part of BAU, which is thermal constraints and so on. But part of it will be if there is an outage, or if there is a line outage, or if there is a contingency event, then AEMO will impose additional constraints on top of the system normal constraints. And they manage through NEMD, and NEMD finds the dispatch solution. From time to time, AEMO may need to give directions, and we saw this for quite a period of time in South Australia, where AEMO was having to give directions for synchronous generators to stay online, and that was in order to maintain system strength in South Australia. And with the synchronous condensers on, that need has reduced, but it is still a feature of managing the South Australian power system. If you are directed, you get compensated, and there are rules to establish the amount of compensation. There's effectively an automatic level of compensation, and if you have costs above that, you can claim additional compensation. Reserves are also part of AEMO's sort of toolkit of interventions, and reserves are required to maintain reliability in the power system. And each year, AEMO will be typically identifying short-term RERT reserves, which are the reserves that are used to maintain reliability, as well as if there has been a reliability gap identified, AEMO can procure interim reliability reserves, which are can be used for up to 3 years in advance. System services are sometimes required to be procured as well. And if we get to the situation which nobody wants, where there is insufficient supply to meet demand, then AEMO is enabled to shed load or instruct the transmission network service providers to shed load in certain parts of the system to maintain supply and demand. And when that happens, that sets the price at the market price cap. So I talked a bit about the spot market and dispatch and AEMO's interventions in that. But as I said at the start, the contract market is a very important part of our wholesale market that we have in the NEM. And a contract market complements the spot market. So what this diagram shows is that retailers pay the pool price for the energy that their customers use, and the generators are paid the pool price for any generation that they provide. So because generators are receiving pool prices, they can enter into a relationship, a contract with a retailer, where both parties can manage their price risk. So a retailer is obviously worried about being short or being exposed to very high pool prices. And so it will usually have risk management protocols which require it to hedge that risk. And a generator themselves will be worried about the price that they're going to get for their generation, and they would like to lock that in a lot of circumstances. So entering a swap contract, and that's just one type of derivative contract that can be entered, is a way for both parties to fix the price of the energy so that they can then sort of focus on their underlying businesses without having to worry too much about their exposure to volatile pool prices. If volatile pool prices persist, then there is a capping mechanism in the NEM where if the cumulative price exceeds the threshold over a period of a week, then the price AEMO will cap the price, as we're required to, and set the pool price to $600 a megawatt hour. That's higher than it used to be. Pre-2022, it was set at $300 a megawatt hour. And another feature of settlements here is that all of the payments are based on the grossed up meter readings. So the meter readings are applied against distribution and transmission losses. And retailers have to post credentials when they are participating in the NEM, and that's to ensure the financial integrity of the NEM. We have a delayed sort of settlement protocol of sort of settlement in arrears, and so retailers need to post credentials to cover the potential exposure that can arise prior to all of the payments being made. Hedging and contract markets. Here's a simple diagram which shows a natural exposure for a generator is that they are long, and that means that they increase revenue with increasing pool prices. And so if a generator sells a swap, it can create a hedge position, which is shown by that dotted line. And similarly for a retailer, if it if it has a short position, it can buy a swap and create that sort of stable hedge position. Contracts are either bilaterally traded, and that's sometimes called over-the-counter, OTC, or via the ASX Futures Exchange. And here's a little chart from the Futures website, which shows the New South Wales calendar 2025 contract, which is a flat swap covering all of the periods in 2025 and how that price has moved over the last year. And you'll see the up and down, and it sort of rallied sort of through that May-June period. And these prices will typically depend on obviously the trader's view of what's happening in the market and the natural sort of buying and selling appetite of the various parties. So I might just pause there for some questions before we go and discuss any market trends.
Great, thanks, Paul. We have some questions online, but why don't we start here in the room?
Very much. Roger Dargaville from, I'll show wait for Mike.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Roger Dargaville from Monash University. You said that the generators can, they put in their bidding stack and they can rebid for a reason. What kind of reasons are they allowed to use to rebid their capacity?
Those are governed by the AER, but it sort of boils down to the concept of good faith bidding, and I may be out of date with that, but the principle is that they need to be able to demonstrate that their bids have been changed for a genuine reason. They're not trying to ramp the market price up for their own benefit. And the AER has extensive powers and does use them to prosecute on occasion when it can find evidence that a participant has abused its power in the market.
related to that, we had a question about whether rebidding under the rules can be distinguished from rebidding due to contravention of the rules or administrative powers.
Well, that's a job for the AER, and they've got a lot of people who are much better able to answer that question than I am.
Okay, very good. Yes. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just curious to know whether our market is unusual in the global energy markets, whether there's any major differences overseas or here?
Yes, that's a good question. There's lots of different types of markets, and markets have a whole bunch of features which distinguish them. So there's a normal dichotomy between sort of energy-only markets and capacity markets. And so we have an energy-only market. ERCOT in Texas has an energy-only market. And then there's capacity markets, which are used in various places. So PJM in the eastern center of the United States has a capacity market. And then there's various other differences. So you have day-ahead markets. In Western Australia, we have a day-ahead market and a capacity market. So we have a difference between the WEM, as it's called, and the NEM. And then you have places like CAISO, the California market, where you then start realizing that there's other features to distinguish the market, such as the level of retail competition. So you might have a very complicated wholesale market, but if there is limited retail competition, then it's really achieving a different purpose to the NEM. And the NEM is quite unusual in the amount of retail competition that we have here compared to a lot of other markets. Even in PJM, many of the states don't have retail competition, whereas some of them do, but they all participate in the PJM wholesale market.
Great. A couple of clarifying questions. One, how did we get to 17,500 per megawatt hour?
That was decided by the reliability panel, and every 4 years they do a review. So the AEMC appoints a panel which advises it, and the panel did a review a couple of years ago, which basically set the level of the market price cap for the next 4 years. And the market price cap is on a trajectory of increasing above $22,000, I think. So it hasn't changed a lot over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, but now we're seeing a ramp up in that market price cap.
and one that's maybe a little more theoretical, but you explained the marginal pricing where the whole market receives the price of the marginal unit of generation.
Yep.
Any thoughts on a pay-as bid system versus a marginal price system?
Yes, pay-as bid is an interesting variant and has some merits. The main challenge of pay-as bid is that it becomes very hard for proponents to figure out how to bid compared to a marginal pricing market. And so it can lead to quite unstable price outcomes. And one of the advantages that we have in the NEM of a sort of market that settles in this way is that there is something which anchors sort of bidding and contracting decisions, and a market is required to sort of collectively form a view of what the price is, and so you need this sort of mechanism. And one thing to think about is we go out to 2050 and thermal generation sort of comes out of the bid stack, and you have a lot of zero SRMC renewables, and you have a lot of storage, which doesn't necessarily have a very high SRMC, but has a high opportunity cost. How does prices get set in that sort of world without that sort of strong anchor that we have at the moment of a thermal generator sort of SRMC curve?
Great. We'll take one down the back here.
About 6 weeks ago, I got a phone call from Origin Energy saying that they've got a cheaper contract for me for my electricity at home. So I said, okay, switch. I get a bill today that says I'm on a higher rate than another rate that they've got. So how do I keep on the lowest rate possible?
Yes, that's
with the electricity?
Great question. And one of my hobbies is switching retailers for a better deal. And so the best source of information is Vic Energy Compare website. And that I would recommend you start there. It's very easy to use, and it gives you a ranked list of the best energy bids. And in fact, I just changed mine last week when my current supplier sent me a note saying they were going to increase my prices quite significantly, and I was able to find a much better deal by switching. Not as good as the deal I was on, but better than they were going to give me.
I'm watching the clock, and I want Paul to continue. Maybe one last question. An interesting feature of our market is that prices can go negative, right, in the wholesale market. And I wonder if you could maybe just walk us through intuitively what's happening in terms of where dollars are flowing when the prices are going negative, and does that mean that generators are actually paying money rather than receiving money?
Yes, absolutely. So negative prices means a generator is paying to generate, and a customer is being paid to use energy. So it sounds sort of strange, but it is a feature of our market for a few different reasons. And it's not a feature of the gas market. So the gas market is kept out at zero, but the electricity market has bidding allowed down to -1,000. So why would a generator want to bid at -1,000? Well, they want to get dispatched, particularly if they have a contract position or a retail position. So generators might want to bid at -1,000 or a negative number just to get their generation dispatched and get the pool price. The danger for them is if there's too many generators doing that, they can collapse the pool price and it can end up negative. And that can definitely happen. And in fact, prices in Victoria and South Australia in 2023 averaged negative in the middle of the day across the whole year. So the middle of the day, this can happen. It also reflects that renewable generators have another source of income, which is their large-scale generation certificate, which they get for generating, and that's worth, say, $40 a megawatt hour. So they should be prepared to bid down to -40 as a sort of SRMC. So it wouldn't be surprising if the price was being set at those levels. Thermal generators also have an interest in bidding negative in order to stay on and not have to keep switching on and off their thermal plant. And there are costs associated with startup and so on. So for a short period of time, they might be prepared to tolerate negative prices, or even if they've hedged their load and sold contracts, then they would be prepared to tolerate negative prices.
Great, thank you. We're going to have time for more questions a little later on, but maybe we'll let Paul carry on.
Okay, so we'll get into some trends now, and I'm sure this will generate some interesting discussion. So these charts just show on the same scale the thermal generation output in the NEM and the renewable generation output since 2016. And so you can see here, obviously, the energy transition is proceeding at a pace, and coal generation has fallen from 75% of the generation mix down to 53% today. And renewables is growing strongly, and you can see the renewables comprised of hydro, grid-scale wind and grid-scale solar, as well as distributed PV, and distributed PV includes rooftop PV, plus also small-scale PV installations that are below the threshold to register. So we see that renewables is growing strongly. You can see a sort of seasonal sort of difference there, and there is a seasonal difference, particularly some features like Q2, the quarter we've just been through, is traditionally the lowest quarter for renewables, April through June, and Q4 is traditionally the highest quarter for renewables. So you have that sort of effect. You also have quite big differences between northern solar generation and southern solar generation, given the number of hours of daylight variation throughout the year. So distributed PV is having a major impact on the system, and the left chart shows how the South Australian average demand profile has changed over time. So this represents the average megawatts across all periods of the day, averaged across each year. And so in 2010, we had sort of no real discernible dip in the middle of the day. And now we have quite a strong in 2023 hollowing out of the demand curve in the middle of the day. And that's because we have effectively self-supply happening from solar, distributed solar on rooftops and in small scale setups in South Australia, and that's displacing the thermal generation. It also leads to quite a large change in where minimum demands are occurring, and the right-hand chart shows how minimum demands have changed. So when this chart would have started, all of the minimum demands would have been overnight minimums, sort of 4 o'clock in the morning. Now the minimum in all regions is the middle of the day. New South Wales was the last to convert from overnight to middle of the day. And you'll see South Australia, which is shown on the right-hand axis, dipping down to even negative minimum demand. And negative minimum demand means we're exporting more distributed PV from South Australia than demand in South Australia. And as I mentioned earlier, middle of the day prices are now negative in Victoria, South Australia. So far in 2024, we've had a bit of a bump up, but it will be interesting to see if that trend continues over the course of 2024. I've put this chart in, which wasn't in my last presentation when I last did this seminar. So this just shows you how batteries operate in the NEM, and I've just picked an example here of how the blue line, which is the state of charge, changes over the day, and that's on the left-hand axis, and the grey bars are the pool price, and they're shown on the right-hand axis. And so state of charge will vary for a number of different reasons. So overnight, you'll see a gradual decline in state of charge. And that's because of auxiliary load. So battery isn't just getting load and generation from the NEM. It also typically has co-located air conditioning and auxiliary loads like lighting and so on. And that just leads to this sort of general decline in load overnight. And then in the morning, as the solar radiation sort of comes up, it starts charging and buying cheap energy. You'll notice the RRP is very low at that time. And then we get to the middle of the day and it's pretty fully charged, but it then starts providing RAISE FCAS. And as I mentioned at the start of this, RAISE FCAS, which is regulation RAISE frequency and control, requires you to generate, to provide that service. So that reduces the state of charge during that middle of the day period. It then has to start charging again to rebuild its state of charge before the evening peak. And then as those high pool prices come through in the late afternoon and evening, it starts generating and dispatching itself to take advantage of those high prices. But by about sort of 8 o'clock, 8:30, it's sort of exhausted most of its state of charge, and it starts charging again, even with some prices sort of being relatively high there, so that it's ready for the next set of price. So this is just an example of how a battery contributes to system outcomes over a day. Batteries are particularly good at providing frequency control services. They follow the targets almost precisely. And they also provide many other services in terms of charging and being ready to meet these evening peaks. Another feature which is sort of maybe not as well known is batteries participate in various schemes to protect the system. And AEMO has a system integrity protection scheme called SIPS. And a lot of batteries participate in that, such as the VIC Big Battery. But there's other transmission providers also contract directly with batteries to provide local system service as well. So they offer FCAS, they offer energy charging and discharging, and then they offer these system security services, which are very valuable. So let's talk about electricity prices and where they're going. Well, I won't talk about where they're going because I don't know. But this is the long-term trend. So the red line is the average NEM mainland price, so excluding Tasmania. And you'll notice sort of lots of ups and downs, and I've tried to flag some of the ups. So the 2007 drought, the carbon tax, the Hazelwood close in 2017, which corresponded with some high gas prices. Then we had a big dip with COVID, and then the Ukraine war leading to a pretty large price spike. Now, the purple line is the volatility component of this. This is the component of the pool price which is due to volatile prices above $300. And you'll notice, for the most part, it doesn't explain those ups and downs. So when we get an event like the Ukraine war or the Hazelwood close, the price it moves here across the board. So it's not just there's a bunch more $1,000 prices, it's all the prices are being uplifted during these events. The other thing, just as a guidance there, I've just taken the first NEM price in 2000 and just escalated it by CPI. And coincidentally, it's ended up as pretty much the same as the 2023 price. But thought that was interesting. Wholesale and retail prices. So how do they interact? Well, if you're a large customer, a commercial and industrial customer, you are typically paying the wholesale price, and you will have a contract with a retailer, or you might participate directly in the NEM, as some large smelters do. And you will pay a negotiated wholesale price, which is typically related to the prevailing level of contracts that are out there. You will also typically pay green prices on a negotiated basis, and by green prices, I'm talking about the various certificates that apply in each state. So you've got the large scale and small scale certificates, which comprise the RET, Renewable Energy Target, and you've also got various other schemes in different states. Now, mass market customers, which I'm sure we're all much more interested in, have a bundled price, and that is regulated by, in Victoria, the ESC, and interstate, it's regulated by the AER. So in Victoria, we have the Victorian default offer, and interstate, we have the default market offer of the AER, and they set the maximum price for a typical customer that can be charged. And they take into account a sort of cost stack approach in both cases, and they build up a cost stack and add on a fair sort of regulated return. And that's the maximum price you can charge as a retailer. And then retailers are encouraged to discount below those regulated prices. So in terms of what's just happened at 1 July, we've seen regulated prices actually fall for the most part, apart from Queensland, by a modest amount. Yet, as the gentleman pointed out, we've seen retail prices actually increase depending on what sort of offer you were on previously, and always best to shop around. Wholesale prices comprise around 35 to 40% of the regulated tariff, and they are based on a methodology which is typically a one-year sort of rolling ASX futures contract methodology. And there's a couple of consultants who specialise in this. And then there's a load shape premium, which is added to that. And that's an interesting exercise in terms of working out what is the volatility of a particular load shape. And a mass market customer has a load shape which often peaks in the evening. So they can expect to pay a higher price because there's a correlation between their load and the time at which they're using it, and the price at which it applies at that time. So that's all I've got to talk about. So now happy to take some more questions.
Great. I know there's a couple of questions here. I'll start us off with one from online. A question about sort of the business case for batteries. That market volatility is helpful for the investment case for batteries to the extent that they can be charged with low or negative cost electricity and then sell back into the market when prices are high. But as well, more batteries are coming into the market as well. We're definitely not in the business of predicting the future here, but any thoughts about these competing sort of dynamics and is the growing quantity of batteries on the grid likely to, how might that volatility change? You know, how do those things play together?
Yeah, so batteries are still small in the scheme of things. As you saw earlier, thermal generation is still sort of more than 50% of energy. But they are increasing. Batteries initially were subsidised by various mechanisms and for the most part are still subsidised. And batteries, we all like to think that they make their money from energy arbitrage, buy low, sell high. But in fact, batteries have, for the most part, made at least sort of half of their money from FCAS and from other services rather than energy services, as well as providing a source of capacity and being able to discharge at those very volatile high prices. As we go forward, obviously difficult to know how the future will unfold. FCAS is more likely to become a market that becomes saturated. And whilst AEMO has quite regularly and for very good reasons increased its FCAS requirements, it's likely that the amount of batteries being added to the grid and the number that can provide FCAS, as well as some non-traditional sources like demand-side sources also providing FCAS, data centres even. And so I would expect, and we've seen a bit of this over the last few months, of FCAS prices moderating. So batteries then having to rely more on their energy arbitrage as their source of revenue. But we're also very much in the midst of governments promoting certain types of investments, and batteries are eligible under the New South Wales roadmap to participate in tenders and under the Commonwealth's Capacity Investment Scheme as well. So I would suggest there's still some more subsidisation of batteries required or likely. And the other place you'll see batteries is being installed in hybrid installations where renewable generators will see that there's a case to add a battery into a solar farm so that it can sort of avoid those negative prices, for instance, in the middle of the day, and maybe shift its load, shift its output to some of the better price periods.
Excellent. Can you shed some light on how or why NEMDA sets capacity constraints on the interconnectors between regions? Because the capacities are a lot higher than they usually set at. Sometimes I see it limited at 500, 600 when the capacity is 1500.
So managing transmission limits, not just interconnectors, but also non-interconnector lines, is a continuous activity for AEMO, and it's based on basically a whole bunch of system requirements. So you can think about there's a thermal line limit, and that itself is weather dependent. But also a lot will depend on the state of the system and where generation is originating from and where it's flowing to, and what lines are in service and out of service. So across the board, there will be effectively dynamic setting of capacity limits, and often with interconnectors, there'll be, as we've seen, particularly on New South Wales to Queensland, we've seen work on those lines to upgrade them at various times. And when you have work on the lines, you might be in a situation where one line is out and you're then having to even force flow capacity in the opposite direction to what you might think to maintain security in a particular region. And we see force flows being used in South Australia and Queensland and Tasmania to maintain system security. So it's difficult to answer the question because it depends on so many circumstances, but just to give you a flavour that AEMO is constantly having to juggle all of these things to maintain power system security.
Thanks for the great presentation. So extreme weather events are becoming really common, and as recent as last February, we had something in Victoria. And what generally happens is there'll be a cascade failure of generators and the spot prices just shoot up. So how does the authorities or how does the operator deal with that?
Yes, well, the February event was a particularly interesting and challenging event because we had a sort of storm come through and knock over some transmission lines, and then there was a trip at Loy Yang A, and then there were various other events over a period of fewer hours, and the price became very volatile, and AEMO was capping the price at one point and then was able to release the market price cap. So we had what's called a LOR3, a lack of reserve 3, where there's insufficient supply to meet demand. So AEMO is sort of well placed to deal with these events. I mean, we plan for them and prepare for them, and we have a very highly skilled control centre where they practice for events on the power system and even being able to restore a power system from a black start sort of situation. So most of the time it's sort of routine and boring in the control room, but then from time to time it gets extremely exciting and everyone just leaves them to get on with it.
We have a couple of questions online related to off-peak hot water heating.
Oh, yes.
One, whether that was a artifact in your graph there from South Australia at 11:30 at night.
Yes.
But also whether we might think about moving that, where we traditionally deployed that to be off-peak is the new, this concept of off-peak. Might we want to do that in the middle of the day instead when electricity prices are low?
Yes, yes. And if you think about peak and off-peak, we've got these definitions which have sort of stayed with us for a number of decades now, but in terms of where prices are, the off-peak prices are the middle of the day, and there have been retailers who have offered free electricity in the middle of the day because they're basically being paid to have you as a customer in the middle of the day. So this chart, the left-hand chart, as the questionnaire points out, has that little kick up at midnight in South Australia, and that's to do with the hot water systems that have been installed there. And for a long period of time, there has been a notion that these should be transitioned, and apparently it is quite a lot of work to reset these timers, and I understand that they are transitioning, but it's maybe not as quickly as one might like. Other places, Queensland has ripple control of its hot water and some other services. I think even air conditioning for some people on some tariffs. And so, depending on which distribution area you're in, you'll find that the distributor has more or less ability to change the timing of when the hot water load is used. And in general terms, electricity hot water has been on the decline for many years, and obviously solar hot water has sort of replaced it to a fair degree, and it will be interesting to see how that evolves vis-a-vis gas, and whether we favour sort of gas hot water boosted or electricity hot water boosted going forwards.
Thanks. I'm coming back to the mechanics of the dispatch engine. So you said the generators have to have their bids in by 12 o'clock. Price bids in. At what point do those bids become active? So at 12 o'clock, those bids, is it 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. that those bids start operating?
It's a good question. I wouldn't know the exact detail of that. I also do know that they don't change those price bids necessarily very often. So a generator might lock in a sort of 10 price bands for a number of weeks or even months in some cases. And then they just content to move the volume between those different price bands.
And just a little follow-up. How long before real time can the generators rebid their capacity?
Right up until gate closure, which is maybe 10 seconds before the dispatch interval, I'd a guess.
Right.
It's quite close to the dispatch interval. And we do find some constant rebidding from some sources where they are sending lots and lots of rebids, and sometimes it has caused system problems with the amount of rebidding coming from. But it's only the last one at gate closure is the one that's used.
Can I have one more question? It does follow on directly. So how do the generators that are impacted by those rebids, so they may be losing capacity, how are they able to manage their facilities if they're being told with 10 seconds notice that, no, we only want 200 megawatts rather than 300 megawatts from your plant now?
The actual people that are bidding, well, you would hope that the traders who are bidding the plant are in touch with the operators who are running the plant. And I know, having worked at Energy Australia and AGL, that was the case at those larger businesses. The trading function, the physical markets function was highly integrated with the generator operations function. But there can be times where things are happening at the plant, and it takes the traders a while to sort of react to that, and it may take the plant a while to fully understand what's happening, and you get tube leaks and this sort of thing, and suddenly they can worsen.
Related to that, maybe someone's asked if you could just elaborate on the specific role of the price bands. Why do we put in 10 bids?
It's a market design construct. There's no particular reason why it needs to be 10. I think the idea was probably originally to give enough variability so that parties could sort of pitch their megawatts across different bands. I mean, you could have 5 bands, you could have more bands. The thing that limits it at the moment is our systems at AEMO are all highly integrated and interdependent. And so even when we went to the 20 bands for the IESS change, that was quite a significant system change across the board. Not so much in dispatch and bidding, but in settlements, where basically all of the settlements tables that have been used since market start had to be redone, and we've now got brand new settlements tables. So remember that if you're adding up energy over a year, over 2024, so you need to go to 2 different settlement tables to get your information.
Hi, I'm interested in how we got to this idea of the 5-minute settlement for spot pricing versus something like 1 minute on the extreme end or 1 hour on the other end.
Yeah. From memory, I think we might have started the market back in the day with an hour, but we've had half an hour for most of the NEMS history, and then that was changed with the 5-minute settlement rule change, which I think was October 21, and we went to 5-minute pricing there. But we've had 5-minute dispatch for a very long time. And so what used to happen was we had a 5-minute dispatch, but we had a 30-minute settlements. And so that would lead to some strange bidding in certain situations where if you had a price spike on the first dispatch interval, everyone would try and rush in to get dispatched so that they got a share of that average for the 30 minutes that would be used for settlements. So that sort of disorderly sort of bidding was eliminated once we changed to 5-minute settlements. But 5-minute settlement does carry other sort of considerations, because it's obviously involves a lot more metadata, it's a lot more system intensive from a sort of settlements point of view as well.
Hi, yes, thanks. The solar penetration of the market has gone faster than anyone expected, and the coal leaving the market has gone faster than anyone expected. It's reasonable to assume that the EV penetration is going to go faster than anyone expected, especially when things like price of battery in China almost halved last year. What sort of policies or leverages can you use so that people using their EVs can strengthen the network rather than do damage?
Yes. So EVs are factored into AEMO's demand forecasts, and that forecasting process is based on a lot of stakeholder consultation, and obviously there's a whole range of views as to how fast EV uptake will sort of eventuate. But the key thing with EVs is as you point out, when you charge is the important thing, and ideally we want to encourage charging in the middle of the day when we have excess solar and negative prices, and we want to avoid charging on sort of cold winter nights when you get home from work. And so this is going to be the challenge with EVs, is how to encourage and promote this charging at the optimal times. And the history of sort of pricing and tariffs in the NEM is not good from that point of view, because people generally don't like responding to price signals and don't like to worry about what time they do things, and they have other more important things, strange as it seems, than electricity. So it's going to be a challenge, I think. The other thing which is often talked about is vehicle to grid and sort of using batteries as a source of supply. And there's a few challenges there as well in terms of, one, customer behavior, but also standards. I mean, Tesla warranty doesn't allow it, for instance, or from what I'm told, doesn't even have the right sort of fittings to enable it. And so how likely this will occur is interesting, because most battery installations in the NEM, grid installations, have warranties which limit the amount of cycling of that plant. And that's so that they can guarantee after 10 years that you have 70% or 80% of your storage capacity. So if you have a home battery which is cycling a lot because it's being used in a vehicle to grid mode, then it's likely that your warranties won't be enabled to be redeemed. So you could find your batteries lasting a lot less time than you were expecting.
We've just a couple of minutes left, so we'll take our last question here from the floor. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just going back to the price bands really quickly, is that only for energy when you now have the directional thing with 10 load and 10 generation, or is that for all of the 10 FCAS markets as well? And if so, do we see instances where batteries are simultaneously bidding into like the same raise 5-minute and lower 5-minute in across like all 20?
Yep. So it applies to all 10 FCAS services that you participate in, and not everyone participates in all 10. And for batteries, they have 20, and you have to be just a little bit careful how you construct your battery bids as well to make sure that they align with what you thought you were sort of bidding. So I think we're set up so that they're monotonically increasing, and so and then the load bit of it is handled slightly differently in dispatch.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Paul. I'm sure you'll agree this has been hugely educational. So join me, please, in thanking Paul for his time today. Thanks to those of you who've joined online. Our next seminar will be on the 7th of August on the topic of financial markets. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. Have a good day.